Well, here we are again, lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm Bill Carell, and I've got with me my close buddyette, Jan Jeremias. And the two of us are going to get started with a conversation today. And it's kind of interesting. We spent a little bit of time before the meeting and jumping on here, talking about things that are going in our personal lives, and with a lot of things around wellness and that sort of thing, and folks and loved ones that are in trouble, or you all are going through it too, so I won't say much more about that. With that in mind, I thought what I would talk about today, with your kind partnership, Jan, is maybe we can spend a little bit of time talking about words like, let's say, prosperity, and abundance, and they have their antithesis, which scarcity and poverty and what have you. But in this time at the beginning of 2023, this might be the year to make some particular declarations about being not necessarily successful, but to experience the whole notion of prosperity and and abundance. So, how does that sound to you, my friend?
Oh, sounds great, Bill. Sounds good.
So you
I,
notice we have to have a particular shift in thinking and conversation, to embrace that sort of a concept.
yeah, you do have to have some sort of a shift, and I think that one thing I wanted to clarify. I used to have a friend and teacher say, "Okay, you want abundance, and abundance of what? So be careful what you kind of think about around that word."
Sure.
So let's just clarify it there as to, okay, I want abundance, but be clear as to what you want to be abundant with.
That's the whole, that's the whole law of attraction deal, where
Correct. Correct.
articulation, gets you what you want a lot more than generalities, right? So
That's
welcome, Ken Caputo. We did just start the conversation, and we're coming into 2023, and I think a lot of people are experiencing health issues and family problems, and mostly around the health thing. So I thought we'd kind of kick this off by having a conversation about prosperity, abundance, maybe the antithesis of that, and what would it be like, to really invite prosperity and abundance to come into our lives in 2023. And then Jan's, to summarize what Jan said, it was like yes, and uh, be careful what you wish for, right? So,
right.
did you have any
Right,
more?
that and just be clear as to, like, not even be careful what you wish for. It's the kind of thing where, your thoughts are energy and affect, if you think that, thoughts affect energy and, your body and the way you feel and your emotions and your brain, then just be careful what you think about when you think about abundance. So,
You
that's
know
what
what?
I
That's like that. What the heck was her name? There was a comedian who basically said, I don't know if I want everything. Where would I put it?
good point.
Ken, any thoughts?
Just what came to mind was something my mentor would always say. He said, be very cautious about adding energy to a system that's not in balance.
Mhm.
And and I can think of a couple people in particular that they accumulated a lot of wealth quickly,
Yeah.
and that came at a cost that didn't affect their bank account, but affected especially relationships, in their life. And it was really just they it was too much energy coming at them too fast, and it was difficult for them to handle, and kind of skewed their perspective, and shifted values very quickly, and before you know it, they're looking at kind of some wreckage. So yeah.
I love that, Ken, because basically, as you talk about, we have a balance in our life and we get used to that balance and something shifts. And if you have all your energy being, sorry, if you have all your energy being shifted in one place, the balance, things get off kilter and something
Yeah.
is going to be sacrificed basically, unless you have a plan for it. And then you say, okay, well, but if you don't have a plan, then there is going to be sacrifice that happens, or damage, as you call it.
Well,
Mm.
you know what? It's kind of an interesting thing because a life that is not in balance or in equilibrium is going to be subject to good and so-called good and bad, stressors. And what it basically is going to do is show up areas of weakness, just like a hull integrity test for a ship, right? The whole idea is the more pressure that's put on, whether it's new types of decisions about having more money than you ever thought you deserved or needed. And I have a very close friend who found out that a relative of hers is worth over $1 billion with a B. And this is after a lifetime of living frugally, and nobody in the world knew that this man had any money at all. And so this has come to light, but that's a guy whose life, he was an engineer, and that's a guy whose life was in balance and it could withstand the stress of having, that kind of abundance. And then there are other people, that the opposite is true, that when you start taking away what little they think they have, they can't react to that positively either. But I like the whole notion of what John said. When you put something into a system that's out of balance, look out.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
reveals the capacity of the system, doesn't it?
Well, and on the flip side, it's the only way to know where the imbalances are is to add energy.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like if you start driving a car really really fast, and what what's do the tires start to wobble? Does the engine start making a weird noise? At some point, something's going to tell you I'm the weak link. But if you never like push it a little bit, find the edges, then you don't discover the weak link. If you're interested in like growth. So, so there's that part to it too. It's just not doing it. It's doing it intentionally with a high degree of awareness, situational awareness so that you can, hopefully manage that flow and not, as best you can. We don't always have that level of control, but that's the theory, I guess.
I think about that in regards to, for years with my yoga practice, because as everybody, you want to improve if you're doing something. So for me, I wanted to do more extravagant and more elaborate poses. And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden you're pushing your body to a certain limit that it wasn't before. And that's when you learn what can withstand the energy and what can't. Like if you go to kick up to a handstand and your arms buckle, well, you know that, okay, I'm not as strong in my arms. If I go up and then I start to do a banana back, so my legs start to do like almost like a back bend, then I know that my core isn't strong enough to withhold, and I have to somehow adjust, because otherwise I'm gonna collapse, or I'm gonna get hurt, both. And the fine line is to know, for me, when I used to practice, is when I was ready to try it again, if I had and it didn't work the first time, and to play with that space of like, okay, am I ready or am I not ready? And is my ego getting in the way of wanting to get into
Mm,
that pose, because it would be a really cool thing, and I'm just like, oh, I really want to do it, and am I ready to do it? Because your ego is watching, if you're in a classroom setting, your ego is watching 30 other people who are able to do it, and you feel that pressure of like being the only one who can't, you
yeah.
know? And
And
so
that's what your prediction is in terms of your own thinking, and you don't know if you can or you can't. Coming out of an engineering department environment in five different technical companies, where we every last product was something that was designed to be the hardest in the industry to actually pull off. There was always this conversation by the engineers, that it's got to be better before we can release it. And we get to the point where finally someday somebody says, in a meeting, how do you find out if a boat floats? And the answer comes from me, and I go, you put it in water, you know And so, then the engineer goes, "Well, we did this before." And I said, "Well, the before is not always a predictor of this outcome. What did you learn from before that we can employ to our benefit to be able to have this come out and be the first release that went well?" And that there was silence in the room. No quick answer for that one, which I really enjoyed.
Mhm.
So, you're interested in a couple of Google definitions?
Sure.
They're going to leave you cold. So, abundance is a very large quantity of something. Thank you. And then prosperity is the state of being prosperous or being successful or thriving. So, the neat part of it is they don't talk about the experience of it. They talk about what sounds to me like the measurability of it. For example, have you ever been in a room or a class where somebody at the front of the room goes, "Describe being successful to me." And then somebody says, "Well, it's kind of like, having enough, or it's having attained all of your life's goals, or it's what other people think about you." Or, and then somebody just out of nowhere basically says, "You're kind of so lost in what you're doing that you don't even care, what anybody else thinks." And all of a sudden, hours have gone by. That successful is being so caught up in the journey, there's no need to measure it. There's nothing to measure it against. It's just what else would I do?
Well, when I was talking about the yoga practice, I think I knew for myself, I knew when I had reached a certain level when it got to be whether I didn't care whether I was able to get in. It was much more doing whatever I could do to the ability that I could do it and being okay with that. So that to me is was success. I didn't need to do the what I was okay with not getting there or to that peak pose or whatever it is. We call it the peak pose because usually you build toward it the entire class and then maybe you do it for 5 seconds, but you put all the pieces together to get there. And it was being okay with the fact that I wasn't able to do it.
That's really an interesting and honest perspective, simply because that's how most people feel about everything.
Right.
Is
Which is
that
why I loved yoga
it's better
because
than I did yesterday, It's nowhere near the perfect thing I've got in my mind, and I'm okay with it didn't turn out how I was hoping.
right. And that's why I loved yoga because it was really taking life but bringing it onto the mat and then taking your mat and bringing it into life.
Yeah. And I almost wonder, to kind of like, and not what you said, but what I'm making it mean. Okay. I'm taking full responsibility for this. But that left-handed compliment to yourself, isn't that a little bit like a participation award? Like almost, and people do it. We're trained to react to things like that. We've got an ideal in mind of what it's going to look like when it turns out. And almost nobody, even people who have everything they ever dreamed of, almost nobody appreciates that unless they learned at an early age to appreciate what they have. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So if you like what you've got already, then you can actually appreciate your effort and your attempt and find something that was really good and informative about how you conducted the attempt. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Which is why I like this, because you and I both know very famous people that are miserable human beings, and we're wondering why. They've got billions of dollars. They're getting divorces after 20, 25 years. People hate them. They're in recluse, all that sort of thing. Is that success or abundance? Or is abundance a state of mind that people with nothing, including, the yogis that sit on the hilltop and contemplate their navel? I mean, that's it's the kind of thing that we heard about back in the 1950s and 60s, and part of the reason why yogis came to the United States and cleaned up and were driving gold Cadillacs and Rolls Royces by the end of the 60s. But I'm just wondering if there's something about having an experience of what those two definitions said is more important than like a water level measure.
I think it's kind of interesting. I think sometimes we forget there's the process and then there's the result. So, so I mean, you can be happily married until you aren't. And sometimes that's because someone passes away. Sometimes that's because you've grown apart in your values or ideals. Things aren't static.
Yeah,
So you can happily be a billionaire and have everything and feel on top of the world for 20 years, and then you're not. And sometimes it's not even that you didn't do any, like, it doesn't, if you're not happy now, that doesn't disqualify the happiness you had. It's just that things have changed. So, and I wonder if often, I know for me, there have been times, especially in relationships, where I didn't notice that the relationship was changing and I was holding too tightly to what it was. And it was very hard to own up to the fact that it wasn't that anymore.
yeah,
And sometimes that means it's the relationship is done in the way in its current incarnation. Maybe you don't not have a relationship anymore at all, but that relationship may change, you know?
yeah.
So my relationship with my mentor shifted very much towards the end of his life to one of a friendship. And, we were, before he died, one of the things he said was, I never had a brother until you. And we both cried, and and it was that was not our relationship. Our relationship started, I paid him to teach me martial arts, and for 15 years that was the relationship. But then it shifted as I changed and evolved, he changed and evolved, and then the arc of his life, he got cancer and he had 2 years left, so he made choices, and I'm grateful to be part of those choices, and now my relationship with him is very different. I don't get to talk to him twice a week like I did for years. So but that doesn't disqualify anything that it was. It's just the nature of impermanence that I think sometimes we uh, we have an emotional reaction or an intellectual process we try to go through. I don't know what I'm actually saying, but do you guys kind of know what I'm trying to say?
Mhm, mhm.
I'll tell you what, while you're speaking, you're kind of amplifying what I said about your attention being on the process and being on the journey. Like
Yeah, yeah.
the success experience is not by sitting here, looking at a pile of money that you stacked up, wondering how am I going to do that again, you know, or wondering if that was just a fluke and it'll never happen again. But the other neat thing about it with regard to relationships is kind of the same thing where we think that we can do things up to a point and then we A have control and B it will run itself. Okay. And that's a lot of people's view of success. I've now got, you've heard the term FU money, right? That I've got enough that I can stand by and I can do whatever I want to for the rest of my life, and the rest of the world can just leave me alone. And that was a big term in the 1990s and early 2000s, that I heard around Wall Street all the time was I need to get this amount of money. And then when they got that amount of money, you know what happened a year later? It was all gone. Just like somebody who wins the lotto, because they weren't standing on a strong foundation of already being all right or already being balanced and already having that seeming that there's enough. And it goes back to, I think, one of the early bits of advice that I got from a guy named Matt Steger, who I've talked about before, was kind of like a surrogate father to me. And he would drive me back and forth to the University of Colorado my freshman year, and we'd talk. And he said, "You know what I found?" And I said, "I'm interested in what you found." He said, "Pick something that you absolutely enjoy doing, become the best at it you possibly can, and the money will find you. You won't have to worry about that." He said, "But don't ever look at your bank account to find out if your life is going well, because that will not satisfy you for more than a moment at a time. Look at your relationships, look at your spouse, look at your kids, look at the rest of your family, look at your friends. And this was a guy who took got out of the service in World War II, went to work for a company that sold pipe for water and oil and gas, distribution across the Southwest, and took that from a 3-year, $3 million a year company in 1951 when he started there. He bought the company in 1961, and he took it to an $80 million of a year company in 1971. So over a 20-year period, that transformation came because this guy was affable. He walked around the world, just making people feel good about themselves and laughing. And there was no stress around this man. So do what you like, be the best at it you possibly can, see where that takes you. No, I don't think that's the answer. However, it's something good to think about, I think.
Yeah.
And these shows about people who win the lottery, and a half dozen of them 10 years later have tripled, quadrupled, gone 10x with their winnings. And most everybody else lost the most important relationships they had. They spent money foolishly. They bought many homes that had operating costs they couldn't afford after a few years. They had no idea what they were doing, and they all thought that money was going to solve every problem they had. Turns out it created more, as you said earlier, Ken.
And I think if you
Best
look at
saying I ever heard was, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Oh, it was just a simple quote. It was just money only solves the problems that money creates.
100%.
And I'm not totally myself today, so I actually forgot what I was going to say. So
Sorry about that.
so it'll come back to me, I'm sure. It's that important. But
Or either that or
but
something good.
I was thinking that if you work and you do what you, so if you were to have enough money, like if you're working toward a goal of a financial goal and you say, okay, when I get that, the question is, would you do what you're doing now if you had all the money in the world? Like if you didn't have to worry about money, would you like, would you do the profession you're doing now? Would you, and I mean, I would do exactly what I'm doing now.
I'd just do more of it.
Right, exactly. I would do more of it. I'd probably do a lot more of it pro bono and,
Yep. Yep.
or do a lot more volunteer work or offer it out a lot more than I do or I'm able to now, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, not me neither, not at all. I would love the opportunity to, it's actually something that I think about a lot. Be able to invest in buying back time by paying other people to do things they like to do that I don't like to do, so I can
Uh-huh.
invest more of my time in doing the things I do like to do.
Right. I mean, I think there are a few things I would do that if I, I might travel more or whatever just because I love stuff like that, but I wouldn't change what I
Mm,
did at all. And if I could do it, if I could go out and if that travel involved building homes somewhere, for people or whatever, I would do that. I would make it a kind of philanthropic trip.
yeah.
So,
Mhm.
but I don't think I would change what I did.
You know,
Well,
that's that whole spilling over thing that I've been playing with for a few years now. Just the idea that whatever you fill if you fill yourself up to the point where it's uncontainable, it spills over into people around you. But that could be anything. So it could be, for some people, if they fill themselves up with what they believe is enough wealth, they're going to find ways to give that away or, do something positive with it. If you fill yourself up with love, it'll spill over. If you fill yourself up with anger, that'll spill over. But that whole idea of how often we end up in a state of at least partial depletion, so there's not enough for us, which makes it really hard because now anything you do give away is further depleting you. So it's a lose lose, kind of a zero sum game.
that's always a good indicator, Ken, in my book, that your idea of what you really want isn't what really need. Okay. And
Yeah, yeah.
when you when you come right down to it, there are things in the world that you and I do on a daily basis. At the end of the day, I don't remember the order that I closed or, to me, it's more like, did I do something that made a difference in somebody else's life that I can recognize and I can actually replicate with more people? And then, so having abundance and having unlimited resources or growing limits on the resources allows for the amplification of that desire of what I want to see in the world and being able to, kind of like master the spilling over and having a little bit of say so about the things, where it gets ramped up or gets ramped down.
I was thinking about when you said the spilling over and Ken said the anger and kind of monitoring that. I was thinking and the balance and and I was thinking about my situation right now and this whole idea of being in the caregiver role to a great, for a great period of time and we'll be going in again and how easy it is to become depleted
Yep.
because you're giving to someone else and how you
Mhm.
again rebalance that so you get you know you take your oxygen mask on the airplane so that you're able to like help others like you make sure you're giving to yourself so that you don't feel depleted.
It's
That's a good point actually, because I think that sometimes I've worked with people who get confused. They get so caught up in having healthy boundaries and not being depleted that they forget it's okay to get depleted at times. Sometimes it's good to empty the tank and then fill it fresh, as long as you do find a way to recover and replenish. So you've got to build that in. And
Right.
at times you can't, it's not always linear. It's not like, all right, that person took a lot from me today, so tomorrow I need a break. You I mean, I know personally, I remember at one point it was about 4 years of depletion, and it was just the nature of my life at that time, and I studied the Stoics a lot and read a lot about how crappy Marcus Aurelius's life was, his health, everything, and he had to leave though. So he still had work that needed to be done, and he believed in that work, so you just do it, and but it's interesting how it's like it's again, I think we're back to that perspective of how you view these things and your relationship to it and your acceptance of it, while also your belief in your ability to influence it, and whether it's what you do or how you perceive it or whatever, you do have choices. You may not like them, like Bill was saying, but you do have choices.
Well, one of
And
the things I'd like to say something here
yep.
specifically to that, what it comes back to, Ken, is this inherent belief that having a great life comes from being in control, as if there ever
Mm,
were anything like that that's actually out there in the world, right? And what's closer to the truth is surrendering early on in your life to there is no control, and you have to become really, really good at one of the words is navigation, but I'm going to say, using John's metaphor, upgrading the system and
mm,
recognizing wherever you're having something that's less than a fulfilling day, that basically tells you that there's something that you can work on in your system that would allow you to, experience life differently. And so, for instance, if you're feeling depleted in something that's happening, the world isn't doing that to you. What if you're doing that to yourself? What if
mm,
what is happening is from the skin in and not from the skin out, right?
yeah.
So if that's so, then you've got this ultimate power in terms of not controlling things. But what if it's a small change, like less than 5%, and all of a sudden life's doable again?
And to your point, and both you and your Ken's point, as Ken was talking, and then you, Bill, I thought to myself that part of that really truly comes from knowing yourself and knowing just starting to, as Ken was talking and talking about, he lived in that space of depletion for however many years you mentioned. It's kind of knowing what that feels like in your body and how it feels so that when it starts to happen, you're like, oh, this is starting to deplete me. I have to I have to change, I have to change the direction of the compass, follow a different direction
Mhm.
so that I become more back in balance a little bit more. But I think we have to start to look at the internal signals sometimes
Yeah.
to know that we are not, like, we are depleted or we are out of balance, because otherwise, where are we navigating from? We're navigating from a crooked, like a very precarious course.
Well, there's one more piece to that, okay? And what you continuously point to, which I think is fantastic, is the notion that you and I know our own capacity. And being a coach, all of us know that no human being has any clue of what their greatness actually is. We know what we're used to in terms of comfortable so-called boundaries, like this, I'm at the edge and you can't really put it into words, but this just doesn't feel good to me, this doesn't work for me, this does. So what's your way to react to that is to do some strategy that you did before, leave it where it is, walk away, try something else, as opposed to going back and asking that better question. What is it about this situation right now that's a piece of education that I may have been avoiding for most of my adult life? And if I can get into a state where it's no longer in my way, or there's no longer this relationship, like for instance, that notion of being depleted. If you had a way to deal with a little bit of depletion, then what would you be able to do with the notion of a lot of depletion? So, for instance, when you get to the point where everything that's going on in the world is just totally not good in terms of your view of how the world should be operating. Like, for instance, let's talk about somebody who's in a prisoner of war camp, like McCain, right? For 5 years, every single day. How do you have to
Sorry, I'm
constitute?
back.
Yeah. So how do you have to constitute yourself so that every time your every activity that you have is going to bring you pain? And his choice was, I'm going to invite the pain. I'm going to agitate to the guards until their actions are caused by me, and that will be a win. Can you even imagine that mentality? No more fear of being hit. At the end of the day, the win is when you make the guards go home and hate themselves for how they conducted themselves that day. So, what
But
I'm saying, yeah, that's an extreme example.
but when you were speaking earlier, Bill, I think that we know a lot more about our, let's say, our limits or when we are depleted than we think we do a lot of the time. And I just don't think, I think a lot of people don't know to look.
I think that's good
Mhm.
advice, Jane.
And so I think that that's really is that people don't. I remember doing a workshop and we asked people how they felt. So it was supposed to be on emotions. And everybody said, I mean, I'd say 90% of the class said they felt tired. And we were like, tired's not an emotion. Like, do you feel like, how do you feel? And people don't even know how they feel. And they don't know to even ask
Mhm.
themselves how they feel. And so we used to sit there and say, when you wake up in the morning, like, ask yourself, like, how do you feel? Like, and you could say tired, but are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling joyful? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? But people don't even know to check in like that. And so I think that when you're talking about feeling depleted, or is like, I don't even know that people necessarily know to ask the question.
Yeah, and that also implies, where do you get an answer to a question like that? How to feel? That's usually culturally, mirrored. You kind of check in with other people. And I remember one of the trainings that I went to in back in 1990, and there were some people that were talking about being tired, not having a break for 3 hours. And the forum leader said, "Do you know what utter nonsense that is? You haven't earned the right to be tired at all." And as a matter of fact, if you are concerned that being tired is going to in some way diminish your performance, he said, I'm going to offer you submariners who typically go 32 to 36 hours without sleep. How about ER doctors that do the same thing? It has nothing to do with being tired. It has something to do with being engaged and actually being active and knowing that what you're doing matters and it makes a difference. So all of us who had not been in either of those two circumstances kind of heard that like, well, okay, that sounds pretty cool, but what's that mean to me? And then an ER doctor stood up at the back of the room and said, I once went 7 days with no sleep. There was no one to replace me. And I did this in the field of battle over in Vietnam. He said, I operated on people continuously 24 hours a day for an entire week before I got to take a nap. And then the forum leader said, and how did you feel during that period of time? He said, I didn't have the time or the luxury to feel tired.
Hmm.
And he said, how long did you sleep after you had your time off? He said, I slept for 18 hours. So the really cool part of it, that I'm responding to is anecdotally, we can go out and we can check in with the rest of culture to kind of test what we think limits are for ourselves. And we're either empowered by what we find out or it confirms more about what we think about ourselves already. And I really think that kind of the neat thing in terms of the abundance thinking, it's like that old adage, why aren't there more billionaires? Because there aren't enough people that are willing to do what it takes to be a billionaire. And it's not hard, but you really have to love, like beyond life itself, everything that you're engaged with. You have to love the game, right? And that's true for successful relationships. It's true for failed successful relationships. Because as Ken said, sometimes something comes along and the two participants or the participants in a company, partners, and all the rest of that, they're just not communicating the way that they did when life was good, when everything was flowing as it should and everybody was getting more than a sufficient amount of everything they needed in the moment.
To that point, Bill, I don't know if it's communication when life is good. I think it's just communication. As
Agreed.
I just look at relationships I've had, and it's not like it was just that there was a point where, let's say, communication stopped or things became got to a point and then you kind of let things slide. And relationships are like anything, you have to constantly work at them.
Right.
So there wasn't that kind of exchange because everybody get whatever. Let's say you got busy or whatever happened. And then all of a sudden it becomes more and more challenging to start to open up again because there's been that's just an example. That might be something that happens is you've lost that ability or you all of a sudden you're like it becomes very comfortable almost not to communicate.
And making decisions about limits and what's worth going for.
Right. I mean, making decisions in general, because if you think about it, when you have to make a decision on your own, in some ways, it's a lot, in a lot of ways, it's a lot easier because there's no debate that happens and you don't have to communicate. You just have to like make a choice and you make the choice for yourself, even if it's somebody else is there, as opposed to communicating with someone about that decision, whatever it is. I mean, it could be on what color sofa to buy, like, I mean, it doesn't have to be anything major, but all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, well, it's so much easier to just decide what color I want it to be and not
Right.
have to like ask so and so what color they want or what kind of sofa if we're talking about something as, you know,
And then
I
when
mean,
you when you communicate, so and so will tell you, I don't care what color sofa you get.
that might be true.
And you were pretty sure what this color was not going to work for them, right? So I love what you said because it's all communication. And there's another ism that I heard recently, which basically says that to someone who's a poor communicator, everything's an argument. As opposed to an opportunity to learn something, or as opposed to create something with somebody else. That a conversation is about bringing something into existence that didn't exist before the conversation took place. And that could be that great feeling in your gut. That could be maybe another little aha or something to look up and get more information on afterwards. Yeah.
You know what I'm seeing right now?
Yeah.
Great communicators where everything's an argument.
Yeah.
They're phenomenal at communicating what they believe to be true to the exclusion of anything that goes counter to it. So a lot of the kind of like media personality, YouTube, that kind of stuff. They're just, and I think part of it is they're monetizing a lane. So, so it's like an avatar almost. It's not really even them. It's just they know what drives revenue, but they're very effective communicators.
Well, no, I don't know if I would agree. Okay. So I'm going to the dictionary for a second. Let's see what it says. A person who is able to convey or exchange information, news, or ideas, especially one who is eloquent or skilled. Now, that can be a radio tower, Ken. That's not
Mhm.
communication. Communication is actually give and take, right? The listening part of it is as important as the speaking part, right?
So are they only a great communicator if everyone hears their message? Like they're communicating very effectively to a certain group of individuals who are highly receptive to that message, where others are completely disconnected from it. So what makes you, if are you a great communicator if one person on the planet hears you completely and fully and everybody else can't? Like, what I'm saying? There's like a degree in there that's just kind of interesting
Hang
to
on
me,
for a second.
you know?
Being eloquent and and being a demagogue is not the same thing as being a leader who says what needs to be said, and the people hear it and give it back to them. The finding out who's receiving the message as sent, and getting back from them the same message so that you now have alignment, as opposed to broadcasting and never. I mean, that's Radio Free Europe, or the Chinese broadcast company, or CNN or Fox News, right? They don't get feedback from you and me while we're watching or listening to their broadcast. They find out if we are doing the things that they're trying to sell us, and that's how they find out if their communication method is any good. So I'm actually challenging the notion that communication is a one-way street. That's all. And this is coming from my
Oh,
background in computers, where it's this, half duplexes where I'm just broadcasting all the time, and some of my packets get through. Full duplexes where it comes back to me and says, "This is what you sent me. Here's what I got. Is this what you sent? Does it still work? Yeah, it is. That's exactly what I want you to do." It happens millions of times a second. So the communication
well, I
is
guess I'm saying if you have someone who's communicating, I'm trying to even think of an example. I mean, I guess like someone's communicating that public education is bad, and then a bunch of people act on that and start to undermine the public education system because this person has effectively communicated a perspective on public education that people have not only adopted but are now taking action on. Does that make them an effective communicator?
I think most people would agree with you. And what I would say is, if they can find another communicator who changes their mind in the next paragraph, not effective. And we are constantly seeing that people go along to get along and aren't necessarily adopting the message that's being sent by people. They're keeping their mouths shut. And that doesn't make the
Mm.
community better, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, if somebody stood up and said, counterpoint, "Hey, ladies and gentlemen, why is public education bad again?" You know what I mean? If somebody stood up, Ken, and offered another counterpoint, and did it in such a way that the person who made the first statement isn't diminished by it. So who's the best communicator? Bless you.
Thank you.
So the difference between the definition of communication, in my opinion, is that what's sent is understood and given back in the same manner, which basically means that it's got to be a cycle and a closed loop system, as opposed to just a radio tower broadcasting.
And as you were saying that, what I was thinking earlier, and then you chimed in, Bill. So, is the act of listening. So, is somebody just communicating and is like, are they really being, the word is heard to me. And in that listening is there wisdom that happens on the listener's part. Like, as far as evaluation and trying on, which is what you were speaking to, Bill.
Yeah. So, for example, Ken, let's just take the old days when you and I had a transistor radio. What did we do? We scanned the band, and first thing we did is we looked for the strongest signal where it didn't cut in and out and give us a lot of noise, right? And then the next thing is was it playing the kind of music or the kind of talk radio that we wanted to listen to? So we'd stay there. And then sometimes, if it really got our attention, we would we'd write down, what the frequency was, and we'd go looking for it, right? So same thing with YouTube right now. Do you know that when you watch anything on YouTube, there's an algorithm that's going to give you more of the same? I don't care what you search for. So I'm just saying to you that I believe that most people think that the power is in the speaking. And I'm going to say that I agree with what Jan said. Might be that the power is in the listening and the difference that's caused in the listeners as opposed to the speaker sounding good. That makes
Yeah, I
sense?
guess I view it more as a tool. One of my early martial arts teachers said martial arts is like a hammer. You can crack a skull or you can build a house with it. It's what matters is the intention. So if communication is a tool that you can master, now the intention you put behind it is going to determine what it is. So I can use my martial arts right now and I can go up and beat someone and steal their money, and probably do it pretty effectively. Or I could protect someone. Or I could just not look for trouble and use it to cultivate my own internal capacity. But my skills and abilities at martial arts are undifferentiated. It's just how I choose to apply them that makes the difference. And if someone's unskilled and weaker than me and I decide to beat them up, it doesn't matter how actively they listen or how badly they want to defend themselves. I am going to be able to apply force that they're probably not going to be able to counter, you know? So I guess that's my contrary argument to this.
Let me stay with your metaphor, okay? How you find out if your karate is any good is you put it to work and you see if you end up on the floor or the person that you're fighting against end up on the floor. There's no other way to examine. You can have the most beautiful kata in the entire world and all the rest of it, people oohing and ahhing about all the rest of that. But then you go in the middle and you put on the headgear and you put on the gloves, and let's see who ends up on the floor. Who's communicating better at that point? Well, if you stay in the fight with that person and there's more than one blow, then there is communication going on because there's a give and then there's a receive and then there's a give and then there's a receive. A punch will get you a kick. A roundhouse kick will get you a slide across the knees, break your ankle, whatever. So the point is, I'm saying it takes more than you can be a communicator in an empty room by just speaking. And the whole point of communication is to cause a change in the world, in my opinion. And how you find out that the change in the world is coming as a result of your speaking isn't necessarily what you said, but what you said gets used by other people to make a difference in the world.
Well, I'm
Yeah, I guess
thinking,
I'm saying that's just undifferentiated. So, that the impact of that, the result of that level of communication isn't necessarily going to be a positive. It's a tool. So, and the other thing that's interesting is the example you're giving is under the assumption that you have two skilled opponents testing each other, but that's not always the case. There can be a discrepancy in skill where one is able to more forcefully apply. I mean, a black belt adult martial artist who decides to beat up a 10-year-old,
Yeah, but
it's a very different thing.
I'm you hit
and
that when you hit that 10-year-old, Ken, you are communicating because it's being received by that 10-year-old. That's all I'm saying to you. There's a
Oh
result,
yeah,
measurable,
yeah, yeah,
specific
yeah, yeah.
result.
and
And
Yeah,
that
and
no, that I don't totally agree with. Yeah.
and but I think when you were talking, Bill, about you know the two martial artists and the one that ends up on the ground, that kind of goes against what I talked about in the beginning. The fact of like, yes, no, I'm not in combat with someone else when I'm on my yoga mat, but I am in communication with myself the entire time.
Right. The communication aspect is different than appreciating your attempt in the moment.
Well, but I'm still communicating with myself because what is the dialogue that's happening inside me as I do this? So, is my dialogue, you're a total, like, you're a total incompetent person because you can't do this pose? Or is it, you know, kind of like when you go to meditate and you don't meditate and then you take out the proverbial whip and you whap, like you know, you whip yourself because you didn't do something. And so
Yeah.
what's the dialogue and the communication you're having on your own when you're doing something like that? So there is, to me, it's not, you know, even with those two martial artists, I mean, they're communicating with themselves the entire time. So what is it they're saying to themselves as they have done the best they could, even if they end up on the floor? So there's communication
You,
that's what happens.
and you know the funny thing, like now you're back to intention. Like 35 years of training martial arts for me, I really don't care how well I can fight. I love the fact that my blood pressure is perfect. I'm on 0 prescription medications. I sleep great. My mind is clear. It's like, for me, the fight has been to maintain my best self in service to all of the things I want to do for the world around me. So, so it's like that's a very, and I know people that is not their intention. It is purely, they want to compete, or they're going to go, they're a law enforcement officer, they're in the military, very different, but my, they're not, they don't disqualify each other.
Right.
It's, even the different styles don't disqualify each other. It's all about how you utilize that tool. And honestly, in the end, I've utilized it in a way that I could have just done it this entire time, just to be more effective within myself, and had no impact on anything around me, if I chose to.
Yeah. So I want to just stand right where you are right now for a moment. You're a great teacher. And just let that sink in for a second. Picture yourself for 35 years never interacting with another human being at all about martial arts. Self trained, you watch videotapes. That's like the conversation with yourself sort of thing. And most people believe, that that's more important than feedback that they're getting from the outside world. You could be the best communicator in your living room watching a video telling you how to perform the katas, right? People do that. They
Mhm.
actually aren't around where there's other human beings, and they do it as a form of exercise and all the rest of that. So the distinction here really has less to do with karate as, a great oratory, or reading
Mhm.
what the Stoics wrote 2,000 years later, because if no one reads the Stoics, there's no communication going on. And where their what they wrote and their original thoughts are very powerful when two or three people get together and start to exchange ideas about what they read. See what I'm saying?
I think I lost the thread someplace in here, because I think originally my only question was if, because I think we were, when it originally started, were we talking about what it means to be a great communicator? And
Yes.
I think my challenge to that is, if you're able to communicate things that lead to, you know, negative results, are you still a great communicator? Like,
Yes.
where you're inflexible, you have a specific, uh, let's say, agenda, but you're masterful at communicating that agenda, and you can influence people. Does that make you a great communicator? So I think that's where I started, and I totally agree. Like, as a tool, if the
Yeah.
hammer sits in a drawer, it may be a great hammer, but it's not having any real influence until it's put to use. So yeah, I 100% agree with that.
You know how many gym cards go into the wallet and never get used? So I kind
So
of
I
stick with, right. I'm more or less basically saying, in agreement with you, that great speaking can evoke great listening, but they both need to be there. In my opinion, as far as communication, or you don't have communication. You can have the cell tower working, but nobody's got a phone. That's
Yeah,
all.
now I understand. Yeah, absolutely.
uh,
Yeah.
but to my note, when you talk about, I think I look at my yoga practice and how I look at um, how it's influenced the way I am in the world, whether I communicate or not, because it's working with me and how I communicate, for example.
Right.
So as Ken is on his is I don't know enough about karate to know whether you call it a mat or whatever, and is doing whatever he needs to do, however that affects him is, and that and the way he feels and the way he acts and carries himself, the more he the more he acts in this world. So even if he does not necessarily teach at all, it's still affecting how he is in this world. Just like whether I mean I've been teaching for over 18 years, and whether I teach or not, how I am on my mat and then go forward after that influences how every all my actions after that point.
I think there's still a level of communication going on,
Yeah, there is.
because it's nonverbal, or it could
Right,
just
exactly.
be, like it's funny. I mean, I've always been amazed. You can have multiple adults walk into a room full of children, and they'll shift in the way they're kind of responding or behaving, even if you don't say anything. You know, it's just fascinating, and it's just purely them responding to what they're feeling coming off of you, you know, just energetically, non-verbally, they're picking up those cues. So it's
Yeah,
definitely communication still, you
Right.
know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Linguists will tell you that 80% of the information comes from nonverbal reactions.
Yeah, yep.
So, in terms of how this relates back to abundance and prosperity, I think really what it comes back down to, and I think the tie-in between becoming a good communicator or an nth degree black belt in karate, or being, you know, the out on the edge yoga instructor slash inventor, is all of this opportunity within yourself to create that boundless, kind of like there are no limits to me. Let's play with that for a little while and see where that gets us. Does that get me a little bit more? It's like, are you going to live your life out on the skinny branches, or are you going to stay close to the trunk where it's nice and safe, believing that the wind will never knock the whole tree over? So that's really where I was coming from, however we got into the communications thread. And it's a good thread, it really is, because there's nobody, I'm not right, and I can definitely see your point of view, no doubt about it. And I just wonder, in terms of empowerment and being able to navigate what's going on in the world right now, how do our listeners like take this conversation and realize that you have ultimate choice in every moment to shift something, and immediately uh, be in balance, and to have, sorry, I got postcards coming in from the edge. uh, and have this opportunity to transform your life from it's not working to holy mackerel, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the something I've been reflecting on is the importance of just kind of understanding second and third order consequences to you applying a skill that you've cultivated, and how easy it is to just do it because it feels right, it feels good in the moment, and then not necessarily thinking through, or, for some people, they just don't care. It's just the immediacy is what matters. And, that's your problem if it doesn't, if there's a ripple effect that, a consequence of it. So it's kind of interesting. Like for me, it's been an interesting practice to think about becoming skillful, whatever it is, whether it's communication or something else, and then considering the impact as that's applied out into the world on the listener, and being thoughtful about it, instead of just, there's a lot of enthusiasm, I guess, right now, because there's a lot of information. So you can learn something and then you can get excited about it, and then you can start telling everybody how this is this thing now, and they should know it too, and everybody would be better for knowing this, and and then it's on to the next thing 20 minutes later. So it's we're in an interesting place.
Topic, it's a true statement, 100%.
And I'm thinking about this whole idea of writing, because having written multiple books, it's always very odd to think about you write and that all of a sudden, it's out there in the world.
Yes.
You write a
Mm,
book, and that whole idea, I remember that I wrote a book and I don't really even know that that totally registered for me originally at the time that I wrote the book.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get the information out there, but that was kind of like, I just want to get the information out there. And then all of a sudden I sat back one day and I'm like, oh my gosh, like people are reading it, it's influencing people. What impact is it having? It was kind of like maybe I was delayed, but that was, I mean, I also, wrote my first book a long time ago, and I don't know if I was hopefully evolved, quote unquote,
Well,
as I am
as
now.
much
ah,
fun as we're having, okay? I'm gonna have to call time on it simply because I'm up against a hard stop. And with that said, I want to thank both of you for joining me and being our hosts this week. And any final thoughts so we can wrap up?
Mm,
no, this was fun.
yeah, it was fun.
Absolutely. I like it better when we don't agree. You know what I mean? Not easily anyway.
Absolutely.
We can both
Yeah,
hear each
yeah.
other. We can understand. But I think that that's a demonstration to people that there's no argument to win. It's like we both have a better understanding what the other person was saying, and that's I think the takeaway for me on this whole hour. And I appreciate both of you very much.
Yeah, that's what makes it fun.
Yep. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen at home, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. Call somebody that you love and let them know, please. Bye for now.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.